Hey, how's it going? Today I want to talk about reading habits and my reading habits and the weird year I've had and what I want to try next year in terms of reading. Because I was gonna do a top 10 favorite books that I read this year, and for clarity's sake, since I talk about comics a lot here, when I mention the word books, I'm talking about novels, I'm talking about prose. And it feels weird to do a top 10 books when I haven't finished one since September. So I guess this is going to be the video where we just kind of go over my year in reading and, my favorite books, I suppose, but also what happened. Because we actually need to take it a little bit further back. We need to take it back to last year. Because last year, after I finished The Wheel of Time, I started feeling like my reading was really my reading eye was opening. I was really starting to devour books and get through them in a timely fashion. And I know it's not about how fast you can read books, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people. But things were going good, and that continued well into 2025. For the first half of this year, I was eating books, with my eyes. I read the majority of the Sun Eater series, I reread Mistborn Era 1 and I read Mistborn Era 2 for the first time. I read other Brandon Sanderson books as well. I read the first Gotrek and Felix Warhammer novel. I read The War of the Worlds. But around June, July-ish, summertime, I hit, I guess, what you would call a reading slump. I have started so many books this year which I have not been able to finish, and I will talk about each one. Firstly, continuing on from my Lord of the Rings read-through, which I began last year, I started Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, and I'm reading that via Audible, and I do occasionally listen through chapters, but man, it's a lot of talking about the environment, and it's a lot of talking about how weary Frodo is, and also it's a weird kind of half book split where in the first half of the book we don't even follow Frodo and Sam at all, and I don't know, it's just not keeping me, which will be absolutely sacrilegious to some people, I know, but I don't know, how far through a beloved classic do you have to get without necessarily loving it yourself before you have to admit that not every book is for everyone and maybe you don't love the beloved classic? I don't know, man. I'm gonna keep trying, I guess, but it's tough. Also, while I read through The Way of Kings and enjoyed it this year, I am stuck halfway through the second book in the Stormlight Archive, Words of Radiance, and that's the best one in this series I've heard, and I've read the first two books before, so maybe that's why, but it's not that I'm not enjoying myself, and this is the case with most of these books that I'm going to talk about. I am enjoying reading the books, but there is something in my brain which just finds the idea of continuing them somewhat repellent. And if that sounds weird to you, if that sounds like two things that shouldn't be able to coexist, it happens to me a lot with video games, with writing. I think it's probably ADHD. I can be enjoying the hell out of something, but the prospect of seeing it through to completion is like anathema to me because my brain is just crying out for new experiences. I want to go see what's happening over here. I want to see what this book is all about. What's going on with this game over here, And you might say, oh, it's about discipline. You need to curb those impulses. You need to stick to the thing that you are enjoying or that you know you will enjoy more later down the line. I know, I understand. I read through The Wheel of Time with that mindset. It still took me 3.5 years because of those impulses trying to lead me astray and making the thing that I am enjoying also a thing which is repellent to continue, if you know what I mean. I started The Devils by Joe Abercrombie and I was enjoying it. I did think that the humor was trying a little bit too hard, that we were spending a little bit too much time with the back and forth of the characters, but I was broadly enjoying it. I liked the characters and I wanted to see where the story was going, but again, I just got called away by something else. That whole repellent effect kicked in again. It's almost like my brain can't stand to finish something or stick with it to completion unless it truly has me utterly gripped the entire way through, you know what I mean? Because while I was enjoying The Devils, all I could think of was the fact that I owned the John Gwynne book set of The Faithful and the Fallen, and I kept walking past it on my bookshelf every day, to the point where I just kept like picking up the book and looking at it and holding it and sniffing it and going, no, I can't read it yet, I've got to finish The Devils, until eventually I realized I wasn't reading The Devils because I was too distracted by this other book that I wanted to read, but I wasn't letting myself read it, so I just wasn't reading. So I said, sod it, whatever. Who cares about how many books I'm DNFing? I will just pick up this book, which I really want to read. So I'm super excited to start the Faithful and the Fallen book series, and book 1, Malice, I am 81 pages into, and I haven't read anything from it in about a month. Admittedly, it has a bit of a slow start. I've been introduced to 3 or 4 characters. There are a lot of nouns to learn, and 3 of the 4 characters' POV chapters that I've read so far are very similar characters. They're all young men who are clearly at the beginning of a coming-of-age arc. But I love the vibes, I love the world I've been introduced to, I've enjoyed the prose, I want to keep reading that book, but something primal in my brain just doesn't want to pick up the book again. Oh, and remember how I mentioned I read most of the Sun Eater series, which is one of those book series that had me gripped, like, on a 5 out of 5 level almost all of the way through, and I can't get enough of it. The reason I haven't continued it yet, even though it's now finished, is that I have been reading the novellas which take place between some of the books, and those are interesting and good and worth reading, but they also take away from the main plot, or main pacing, I suppose, of the series, and I've been reading the novella Dregs of Empire all year, and it is like, what, 150 pages probably? I've been reading that all year because it's mildly interesting, and it's something that I'm making myself get through before I can continue the main Sun Eater series, which I'm so invested in. But yeah, I think that sums up all of my DNFs / perpetually in continuation kind of a books so far. But this is a problem which has mostly occurred since summer of this year, so I guess it's worth examining what happened to me in summer this year that changed my reading habits so much. And I think there are 2 things I can attribute it to. Firstly, mental state. I've had issues with depression and anxiety for the second half of this year. Don't worry about me. I'm getting it looked at. I'm getting it seen to. I'm sorting myself out. But we can't rule out that that might have affected my motivation to read books. But the second, and I think more likely cause, is that I have a hyperfixation which comes and goes, I guess is the easiest way to refer to it as, which is comics. And if you've been following this channel, you're not surprised to hear me say that. The second half of this year, I have mostly been reading comics, and I've been having such a good time. I don't regret that. And it's funny because I keep a spreadsheet where I log everything I finish, and this isn't the first time that my reading log has had a big gap in it where I've just it appears to be stopped reading. And the last time that happened, it was also because I got super into comics and I just wanted to explore the Marvel and DC universes and devour everything within each. And I suppose when you think about it, if reading novels and reading comics occupy the same kind of like time in my life, the same space in my brain, then my problem is almost an imagined one. It's not necessarily that I've hit a reading slump or I've stopped reading. It's more that my focus in genre has shifted. And I do personally believe that comics are literature. They're not some lesser form of storytelling. They are worth reading in their own right, especially modern comics. Some of them tell really grounded and emotional stories which are worth reading. And it doesn't all have to be Marvel and DC and superhero stuff. There are so many indie comics out there which explore other genres as well. For me personally, it has been mostly Marvel and DC though. So what's the issue then, pun not intended? Well, first of all, I still want to be reading fantasy and sci-fi novels, you know, like those DNFs do still bother me because I am still curious about those stories and I don't want to have to be restarting them every few years when I want to try them again. That's just gonna burn me out on them forever. But as I've seen with certain books that I am making myself push through, like The Two Towers, I don't know if I'm necessarily getting the most out of them by forcing myself to do that. The other problem is that while I love comics, and I've been really enjoying this last, like, half of the year of just diving into comics probably more thoroughly than I ever have before. I would like to strike a balance. I would like to both read books and comic books. I don't want one to take the place of the other, but for some reason I am having a hard time juggling both of them at once. It feels like I am a slave to the whims of my own fixations in that sense, and it's kind of annoying. You know, just like I said that it's probably ADHD, my inability to finish a book, I think it might also be OCD, my obsession with the idea of finishing books and reading an author's entire works and entire series and stuff like that. And I think those two ideas clashing in my mind is what leads to a lot of conflict within my own brain. Again, though, that's speculation. I'm on waiting lists. I'm talking to doctors. I will hold off of declaring anything about myself based on speculation from an untrained mind. But okay. What do I want to do about it? What are my plans going into 2026? Well, firstly, I'm going to make a concerted effort to really work on the book/comic book balance instead of just letting my whimsy take me wherever whilst also allowing my whimsy to take me wherever, you know? It's a balance, and it's got to be struck. The other thing I think I need to do is diversify the genres of fiction that I am reading. I'm very afraid to leave the sci-fi fantasy space. In fact, I would say even the fantasy space. There's a lot of science fiction which I would like to get around to reading. But it's difficult because I feel like I don't know my own brain well enough sometimes. Like, I'm bad at identifying things that I'm feeling. So maybe one of my issues is that I'm burned out on the fantasy genre, but I'm just not identifying that, and that's why I'm having a hard time finishing anything new. I recently watched Murphy Napier talk about her top 10 books of 2025, and there were some books in there which stood out to me as things which really grabbed my attention that I want to go and read, which are genres of book I've never read before, which is for some reason intimidating to me. The first book she mentioned is The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is by Leo Tolstoy, which is well out of genre fiction, and it's a book about the death of a man and the various perspectives of the people regarding his death and his own perspective about his future death at an earlier point in his life. And the way she talked about that book just struck me as something which I would find super interesting. She also mentioned some non-fiction, which I'm really interested in. I've never read, actually no, I have read a non-fiction book, but it's been about the gaming industry, which feels like cheating to me. But I think I want to get into reading non-fiction next year. So firstly, Murphy mentioned Hiroshima by John Hersey, which is an accounting, or various accountings of the survivors of the Hiroshima nuclear bomb that dropped, which sounds really heavy and also like something which would affect my anxiety, but at the same time it's something I'm so curious about. In recent years, my curiosity has really come to the forefront in terms of wanting to learn again, and mostly that's been through the medium of watching science communicators talk about space and physics, but it's also stuff like this. Things which happened in the world which are so outside of our current understanding of normality, but which happened and were important. Happened within living memory, or maybe just outside of living memory, barely living memory. But yeah, these are real things which happen to real people, and I just kind of want to learn about it and hear about it. I don't know what the driving motivation is there. I know it would be difficult for me to learn about and read, but I want to. It's a bit like the Chernobyl miniseries that HBO did a while back. That was really difficult to watch. It made me feel really anxious. It was like a pit in my chest as I was watching it, knowing that it was a thing that really happened. There's also a book that is based on that was also recommended in Murphy's video, which I might also check out. Outside of that video, though, I've been wanting to check out some autobiographies for a while. I've yet to really land on any single one. I was briefly considering Patrick Stewart's autobiography. The thing is, it's interesting because with an autobiography, you're sinking yourself into someone else's mind and life, right? And I don't know if there's anyone out there that I'm that curious about. I'm more curious about the act of telling your life story and seeing other people's perspectives on life. I think what I would really want, right, there's this Instagram account called A View from a Bridge, and well, most of the time, it's about ordinary people talking down the phone to them about their lives and their perspective on life and the things they've been through and how it's shaped them and stuff. And I find that kind of thing really fascinating. When it comes to autobiographies about famous people, that's a bit different because it's from a certain perspective. It's from some level of success. There's going to be some kind of weird bias there, but they are also just people, so maybe I shouldn't consider it that way. But I wish there were autobiographies of just regular people out and about, I guess memoirs, right? That's what we would call them. I guess they do exist. But I feel like that's usually for veterans of war and stuff, and I'm not as curious about those stories. Although I could be convinced to give those a try. I also really want to learn about history, ancient history specifically. There's a biography of Alexander the Great, which I have kind of like bookmarked to give a try someday. To bring it back to fiction, I also still have yet to explore most of historical fiction. I really enjoyed the first two books of The Last Kingdom, but I did, again, kind of like wander off in the middle of the third book. But I've talked about that before. That was kind of because the character left everyone and everything he ever knew and randomly went north. And for a minute I was wondering why, and then I remembered it's a historical fiction and the plot is driven by real events, and sometimes random things like that are just gonna happen. But yeah, I look at authors like Bernard Cornwell and Con Iggulden and like the 20 book series they put out, and I am very curious, like Simon Scarrow and stuff like that. Could those be books which interest me? Could those be books which are a fun way of kind of immersing myself in the ancient world in a way which is as historically accurate as possible while still telling an interesting original story? So I guess, yeah, as like a wrap up of 2025 and a look ahead to 2026, this is where I'm at. This is the problem I am currently facing. These are my kind of intended routes to checking out like things I might do. I am still gonna obviously try reading some fantasy and sci-fi. It's just in my blood, I guess. And I do have a bunch of books that I was very excited to receive. And maybe that's part of the problem. For my birthday, I got a whole bunch of books I was excited to read, including some of the ones I talked about DNFing here. Maybe the problem is overhyping myself about them. I don't know. One thing I forgot to mention about comics as well is that they are much faster to read through, and so my curiosity can be sated to completion a lot more quickly before my mind starts to wander to other things. But yeah, sorry, I always do this. I interrupt my own outro with extra thoughts. That's going to do it for me. Let me know if you have any advice, any books which you think I should check out that are in the vein of the books I talked about at the end of this video here. Maybe I'm just worrying too much about it. Maybe I should just let myself follow my own fixations and whims, and if I don't read as many books at any given time, it's not a big deal. Anyway, I'm going to stop thinking out loud, and I'll catch you in whatever I make next.